In this portion of the presentation, we're going to start talking about the fortified building programs. The fortified programs, fortified refers to a suite of building programs. The first in the suite is Fortified for Safer Living. That's a new construction standard. It was developed about 9 years ago. It is multi-peril, and we have houses all over the United States that have been designated under that standard. The second and most popular, since we introduced it in 2010, is the Fortified for Existing Homes standard. And that is a standard for taking existing buildings and getting them up either to a modern engineering-based building code level, or in some cases exceeding building code, and improving the performance of that house in the face of a natural disaster. And the last and most recent addition to the Fortified family is Fortified for Safer Business, which is a light commercial new construction standard. So I'm often asked the question, what sets Fortified apart? Why should I choose Fortified? And this diagram illustrates kind of the process that a house has to go through in order to become designated in very basic terms. Essentially, in the new construction standard, the process starts over on the left, and the design criteria are determined for a house in a particular location, and we look at the different perils that could affect that house in that location, and then we have to approve the design of that structure before the first nail is hammered and before the first shovel of dirt is turned. In the existing home standard, we have developed retrofit guidance that tells people or gives homeowners methods to follow to improve the performance of the house. The retrofit standard, which we commonly refer to as the Fortified for Existing Homes program, begins with an evaluation of the property in its current condition. Does it meet our standards now? And if not, how can we get it to meet the standard? Both programs require inspection and verification, and that's the right side of this diagram. That makes us unique and makes this program unique. It ensures that when homeowners invest their hard-earned money in their home, that they're getting what they pay for. Not just thinking it, knowing it. And the bottom of the diagram here also is another unique feature of the Fortified programs. We take a systems approach. We don't just talk about upgrading individual components of the property. We look at the building as an entire system. We look at different areas of the house as independent, or not independent, but as connected systems, like the roof system. And we upgrade that entire system as opposed to just individual components within that system. And then lastly, once the inspection, verification, and compliance has been documented, we issue a Fortified Designation, which is essentially documenting that the home meets the Fortified standard regardless of where it's built. So it's a uniform standard that can be uniformly applied regardless of the county, city, state that it's built in. And that, again, gives the homeowners and the building community an opportunity, certainly the insurance community, an opportunity to look at a house and objectively say, I know how the quality of that construction. And that's a little bit about what brings us to this slide here, fortified versus traditional construction. You can think about a fortified designation as a scorecard, verifying the quality of construction in terms of its durability, not necessarily its fit and finish. And that scorecard gives homeowners a much greater confidence that the specific systems in their home that are critical to resisting the forces of something like a hurricane are adequate and contribute to the home's ability to survive those types of events. As I mentioned before, the purpose of Fortified is to preserve not only life safety but also the property itself, and that is going a little bit further than what the traditional building codes do. We support strong building codes. We advocate strong building codes. We'd like to see stronger building codes, but the emphasis or the impetus behind building codes is not property preservation and protection. It is merely protecting life safety and giving people the opportunity to evacuate in the event that there is a disaster. So for my insurance friends, these next few slides are the ones that are probably the most interesting and tell a very compelling story. This slide here gives a visual representation of what the risk reduction looks like when a new home is built to the Fortified for Safer Living standard. In this case, the standard, if you just took a baseline building, it would be in between these four lines, but essentially, as a home is built to the fortified standard, the risk moves to the left. And again, you can see in this particular slide, the green line, which is the fortified line, is the furthest to the left, meaning that there's the least amount of loss and risk, even when compared to building codes as early or as recent as 2008. And this is a North Carolina slide that was prepared by RMS, the modeling company for us. This is another way of representing that same information. Again, it looks at what the average annual loss would be for the current building stock. If it was built before 1974 in North Carolina, these are the loss percentages that you'd see on the second line. On the third line, you start to see the risk reduction. So if it was built to a 2008 code, the losses would be reduced by 46%, 53%, 42%, 31%. But look at the dramatic reduction compared to the current building stock if you build your home to the fortified standard. You can reduce the risk almost as much as 80%, which is phenomenal. Again, one more way of graphically representing what it looks like if you look at homes that are built or improved to the fortified standard. So the top bar represents 100% loss, and that is assuming that construction has happened before 1994. And as you move down the slide, you can see the different levels of designation for the fortified for existing homes up to gold 2, and then you see another reference to the 2002 Florida Building Code, which is a well-enforced engineering-based building code, and then the performance at the bottom of the slide in terms of risk reduction of almost 80% for fortified for safer living. Just so that we can all be clear, the question I get asked a lot is, what does it mean for bronze 1, bronze 2, silver 1, silver 2, and so on? The 1 indicates a home that has not had its roof covering replaced, but has been designated, meaning the roof covering is in good shape. The rest of the improvements that are needed are done, but the roof covering has not been replaced. A 2 indicates that the roof covering has been replaced, and since Fortified for Existing Homes is an additive program or an incremental program, the bronze 1 goes to silver 1, goes to gold 1, bronze 2 goes to silver 2, goes to gold 2. You cannot cross the tracks unless you replace the roof covering. So how do we know Fortified works? This is a picture of the Boulevard Peninsula in Galveston Bay in Texas. The upper left-hand corner are fortified houses that were built on the peninsula prior to Hurricane Ike. The lower right is a picture of that same peninsula after Hurricane Ike passed directly overhead, and the majority of the houses that you see standing are fortified houses. Everything else on the peninsula was completely wiped away. So Fortified for Safer Living, as I mentioned before, is a new residential construction program. Single-family detached homes qualify for this program. There are a few different stages or phases that the project goes through. The design phase, which must be approved by IBHS and the Fortified program. The construction phase, which requires verification of compliance and documentation. And then the designation phase, which happens after a home has received its certificate of occupancy. This program in just about every area of the country would be considered a Code Plus program, meaning that the criteria are more stringent and rigorous than the actual building code. These are some of the issues that we're trying to prevent: loss of roof covering, loss of sheathing, protection of window openings, garage openings, door openings, and trying to keep water out of the house. As many of you, I'm sure, have experienced, you can have a house that's structurally intact and survives, but the amount of water intrusion that can happen even in a very low intensity storm can cause a structure to be completely uninhabitable and force people out for extended periods of time. So we're trying to keep water out of the house. So what does a Fortified for Safer Living solution look like, and why is it Code Plus? Well, here's a couple of the criteria that really make the program Code Plus. We require that the design wind speed that is used to calculate the building's performance be increased by 20 miles an hour over what the code would require. We also require that all of the components and cladding, so all of the material on the outside of the house, including the windows and doors, siding, roof covering, must be designed to be exposure C. And for those of you who don't know, there are basically three classes of exposure that from a design perspective, refers to how much other stuff is around the house. So how dense are other structures or trees and the like. And exposure C is basically wide open. So we're not assuming that there's going to be anything in the way to cause the wind to be slowed down or weaken the effects of the wind. And that way we get a higher standard of design. And then lastly, we require that the elevation of the property be at least 3 feet above base flood elevation in coastal V and coastal A zones. So here's a couple of just reminders of what the process looks like. The first thing that people do when they want to build a Fortified for Safer Living home is they come to our website, they use our zip code tool, which you see here. They put in their zip code and it tells what perils need to be addressed, and then gives you some direction, or gives the builder or the homeowner some direction on what needs to be incorporated in the design. Those criteria go to the design professional, and the home is designed to meet the fortified standards. Once the home is under construction, inspectors that are trained by IBHS are deployed then at different intervals. There's usually 4 to 5 of these inspections. They coincide with normal building inspections, but the fortified inspector goes out and verifies that the design is being executed and that materials that are being used comply with the fortified standards. And typically, this is happening at foundation, at framing, at close-in, which is just before the drywall is hung in a house, and then after the windows and doors are set and the exterior cladding is installed. And this is how the homeowner is able to prove that their home has complied with the standards. We issue a certificate that identifies the property at its address, the standard it was built to, when it was designated, and then there's a signature from a member of the fortified team, and there's a unique identifying number in the lower left-hand corner. This is the Fortified for Safer Living designation certificate. A very common question is, how much does it cost me to upgrade my home from a normal building code home to a fortified home? Well, generally that's a very difficult question to answer, because it really depends on where you're starting. In some municipalities, a building code doesn't even exist. There's not a building code that's being enforced. In other places like southern Florida, where you have Miami-Dade building code, there's an extreme building code that is enforced and being utilized. But generally speaking, in order to upgrade from a typical home to a fortified home, there'll be an increase of 3 to 10% of the hard costs, not the retail costs, but the actual hard construction costs. Here's an example of 2 specimens built in our lab. One on the left is a code-compliant home. The one on the right is a fortified home. The same basic design with the fortified upgrades installed, including strapping the porch down to the columns down to the foundation, upgraded siding, upgraded roofing products, and what we would call a continuous load path, tying the roof system to the walls to the wall and the floor below it, and then all of that to the foundation. The home on the left, which is the code compliant home, is the one that is destroyed in less than 100 mile an hour winds. The one on the right is the fortified home. The difference in cost, labor and material between these 2 specimens was $2,500. Another question I get is what kinds of homes can be built to this standard, or what architectural looks can be achieved, what price points. And as you can see from the looks here on this page, we have had fortified homes successfully built in historic districts. The upper left-hand corner, modestly priced houses can also achieve this. We have several fortified homes that have been built in partnership with Habitat for Humanity throughout the Gulf and Mid-Atlantic coasts and even into the interior of the country. So this is not a program that has to be done by somebody who's building $1 million home. It can be effectively done with the proper planning and execution, even at the most modest of price points. In the next part of the presentation, we will talk more about the Fortified for Existing Homes program.